Alright, welcome to another episode of Mulling in His Own Stupidity with me, Dave Mullen. Show where I try to find answers among the chaos and uncertainty of the modern world, all the while mulling in my own stupidity. What have I been mulling over this week? Well, wouldn't you like to know? This week, I've been mulling over the moral and practical implications of lying. When I was younger, I remember hearing a story in which people are asked whether they are Christian or whether they believe in God, and despite the obvious risk to their lives, given the situation, they say, yes, we are Christian, or yes, we believe in God, and they are indeed killed for what they believe in. I can't really remember the context or where I heard this story. It's not really relevant. What I can remember distinctly is my reaction to it. I remember thinking, why wouldn't you just lie? Given the choice between lying and surviving or telling the truth and dying, to me it seemed that the obvious choice was the former. And yet now I'm not so sure. Now I wonder whether it is so simple. Today in the modern Western world, we value life itself above most other things, and this is shown by our obsession with longevity, prolonging life through diet and medical intervention. Subsequently, we shrink from death, we hide it away, we don't talk about it, we don't quite want to believe it'll happen to us. We also largely see ourselves as individuals, single entities, not really connected or entwined with anything much outside of ourselves. You may support a football team, you might have some vague feelings of pride and or shame relating to the country you're from. Rule Britannia. You might even be lucky enough to call yourself part of a community, but when it comes to seeing ourselves as part of something bigger, which gives our lives meaning and purpose, I would say for most of us in the modern world today, that space is pretty much empty. And this means that our purpose becomes to live life to the full for as long as possible, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does affect the way that you see the world and the choices you make within it. So if you see life as a cosmic blip in the vast expanse of meaningless nothingness, then lying to save your own skin becomes the obvious choice. If you have a higher value, purpose or goal than simply to live, if you see your life as part of something higher within which it is embedded and which through your actions you must maintain, then the choice is not so simple. Why wouldn't you just lie? Well, because lying might undermine the very fabric of existence, and that would not be good. So that's the first point, and it's about faith. The second point is about truth. Now, I don't claim to know or understand what the truth is, and I'm not even going to attempt to explain what it is in this video. But as I've gotten older, I have come to see how important the truth is. And I do think we all, in some sense, have a responsibility or a duty to at least try and discover the truth and to, in some sense, uphold it. Kind of like we all have a responsibility to uphold the law, even if that means by just not breaking it. Now, this doesn't mean that I think that the truth is simply made up by us. It also doesn't mean that there are no situations in which it's appropriate to lie, because there may definitely be some situations where it's appropriate to lie. It simply means that if you are going to lie, you should do so carefully, because the truth is important and powerful, and therefore undermining it is significant and has consequences. So that's the second point, and it's about the truth. So we got faith and truth. And three things that I read last year kind of relate to this and might help explain what I'm banging on about. The first thing was Middlemarch by George Eliot. Amazing book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. The main character, Dorothea, is very interesting. She has this passionate, fervent desire to make the world a better place. And even though, spoiler alert, aside from relieving the doctor of his debts and contributing some money to the new hospital, she doesn't really change the world in any dramatic way. She does simply through this belief in people, this desire to see the best in people, this faith in people, and most importantly, this willingness to find the truth, to discover the truth in any given situation. She does end up having a profound impact on the world and the people around her simply through her disposition towards it, through her way of being in the world, through her attitude towards the world. And this is all summed up much more succinctly and eloquently by George Eliot herself, who writes at the end of the book, "But the effect of her being was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things aren't so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So that's Dorothea in Middlemarch. Middlemarch. Second thing I read is a book of short stories by Tolstoy. A couple of stories stood out to me. One is called The Forged Coupon. It begins with a young teenage boy asking his father for some money to pay his debts. His father refuses, and on the suggestion of a slightly nefarious friend, he forges a coupon, which is a type of currency they had back in the day in Russia, and it follows the impact of this one, you might say, slightly small, insignificant act of deception. The story comes to a head with a character called Stepan. He's, for all intents and purposes, a pretty good guy, but he grows so bitter and resentful because of the circumstances he finds himself in, which can all be traced back to this one forged coupon, that he flies into a murderous rage and goes on a killing spree. You might say a little bit of an overreaction, but that's what he does. He's so pissed off. At the end of this killing spree, he comes across a character called Maria. Don't you want to see her? Maria is quite a holy woman. She's not a saint or anything, but I suppose what Tolstoy saw as like really truly religious, very meek and humble. She supports her family financially, as well as like helping them around the house and doing all this without complaining. She's a real pushover, basically. She's like a nice lady, and when he's about to kill her, she looks him dead in the eye and she says, well, "What the heck are you doing? Hang on a minute, what the fuck are you doing? Take pity on yourself. You're destroying other people's souls, and what's worse, you're destroying your own too, young man." And he still kills her, but when he's in prison, he's almost like tormented by her image and those words, so much so that he can't sleep. And then after, night after night of this, eventually another prisoner reads him the gospel and he almost has an epiphany. His whole disposition changes. He becomes meek and humble, realizes that it's his duty to help other people, and he begins to see everyone else as like his brother and sister, and tries to help them as best he can. So this story kind of shows both sides. It shows the impact of like one seemingly small, insignificant lie, and then it shows the impact of one person in quite an extreme situation speaking the truth, saying, "This is what you're really doing, is forget about me. I'm just a meek and humble lady." But, you're destroying your own soul here as well. And the last thing I read was a story called Two Old Men. It's about two young women. No, it's about two old men. Unsurprisingly, they go on a pilgrimage. One slightly richer than the other. He suggests to his friend, lads on tour, we've wanted to go on this pilgrimage our whole life. If we don't go now, we're never going to go. So they put all their affairs in order and they set off on this pilgrimage. Partway into the journey, the poorer one stops for a rest. The richer one goes off ahead. While he's resting, he gets thirsty. So he goes around looking for a place where he can get a drink of water. He comes across this house. On entering the house, he finds a family that are on their last legs. And there's been a drought in the region. They haven't had their normal harvest, and so all the adults are like starving, or sick, or dying. There's a few children who are trying to like keep the place going, but they can't do it on their own. And so he's faced with a choice, like, do I carry on my pilgrimage and like rejoin my friend, or do I stay and help this family? What's interesting is he doesn't really have any big like deliberation. He doesn't, weigh up the pros and cons. He just decides to stay for the night and try and help this family. One night turns into several nights turns into weeks turns into months, because every time he thinks about leaving, he realizes, if I go now, this family aren't going to make it. So he stays long enough to be sure that they will make it to the next harvest. He buys them food, he buys them medicines, he even buys them an animal. I think, and all of this out of the money he had saved for his own pilgrimage. So meanwhile, the rich character makes it to the holy city. It's very crowded, full of pilgrims. He listens to some sermons. He visits all the holy sites that you're supposed to visit. He gets pickpocketed. Someone tries to rip him off, I think, for his accommodation, and then he returns home. What's interesting about this, I think, is that, aside from the obvious kind of question of like which of the characters goes on the real pilgrimage, with the slightly obvious answer being the poorer character who helps the family but doesn't make it anywhere near the holy city, probably goes on the real pilgrimage. But I think what's interesting is that the poorer character is faithful to the truth of the world as he finds it. So many of us get caught up in ideas of how the world should be or how we should act in a certain situation, and this can kind of cloud our vision or distract us from seeing the truth of the world, the reality of the situation. It would have been so easy for him to say, my friend's waiting for me up ahead, we've been waiting to do this our whole lives, here's a couple of kopecks, I'm going to be on my way. But if you think about it, if he had done that, the whole rest of his journey would have been a lie. He would have been on a holy pilgrimage knowing that he'd left a family starving behind him. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't stick to an idea of what he should do on a pilgrimage. He responds to the world as he finds it. He sees the truth of human suffering right in front of his eyes, and he responds to it. And I think that's quite important. So you got three different characters who all in one way or another embody that commitment to faith in the truth. You got Dorothea, who's committed to discovering the truth, and Maria, who's committed to speaking the truth even in a very extreme situation, and the old man who sees the truth and responds to it accordingly. So, back to the question, why wouldn't you just lie? Of course, the point of this video is not to say that there's no situation in which it's appropriate to lie. It's simply to say that my perspective on the question has changed somewhat over the years. I used to think it was obvious in that situation to just lie to save your life. And maybe you should, but as I said, over the years I've come to see more and more how it's not as simple as just lying, because the truth is important and powerful, and that means that when you divert from it, it's significant. The word religion comes from a Latin root meaning obligation or bond. And I suppose what I'm getting at, or what I'm coming to realize, is that even if you're not religious, I think all of us in some sense have an obligation to try and discover the truth, to do the right thing in any given situation. And of course, what's right and what's good and what's true can be complicated and multifaceted and multi-layered, and there are many different perspectives. But that doesn't mean these things don't exist, much less that we should stop aiming for them. The truth does exist, and there is a right thing to do in any given situation. And I think maybe even in those extreme situations, we should be committed to doing what's right, or at least trying to do what's right. And rather than just lying, maybe we should just say what is true. I'll leave you with two more quotes quickly from Middlemarch. The first one is, "It is in these acts called trivialities that the seeds of joy are forever wasted, until men and women look round with haggard faces at the devastation their waste has made, and say, 'The earth bears no harvest of sweetness,' calling their denial knowledge." And the last one, "If you are not good, no one is good." I've been Dave Mullen, mulling in his own stupidity. Thanks for watching. See you next time.